Hey!
You ready to hear some more about when I was a kid?
Yeah!
Yeah. You really sound enthusiastic. You ready to hear some more about when I was a kid?
Woo!
Well, I'm going to start off with something really isn't so wonderful. When I was a kid, World War II was raging in Europe. That's a long time ago. Most of you don't even know about that from the history. But I can remember seeing my uncles, Ralph and Don Cleveland, going off to the war. Because they were Christians, Uncle Don became a chaplain's assistant, and Uncle Ralph was a medic. Didn't make any difference though, because they were soldiers. What do soldiers do? They carry guns. They go out into battle. It was a very tough time for my family. My other Cleveland uncle and my Bedell uncles and my father were all exempted because they were in what they called war essential industry. When I was a kid, the atom bomb was born. If you remember your history, it was used twice against Japan. And I fervently pray that will never ever be used again, because it caused horrific loss of life and property. But because of that research that took place to develop that atom bomb, we now have things like nuclear power plants, nuclear medicines, and just all kinds of spin-offs of that. When I was a kid, there were 3 biologists that discovered something called nucleic acids that are responsible for the transfer of hereditary traits. You know what I'm talking about, nucleic acids? You've heard of DNA? These are the guys that discovered it. That's when I was a kid. When I was a kid, they began installing flush toilets in the bathrooms. It was so nice on a cold winter night. I didn't have to get my boots on and get my coveralls on and get my coat on to go outside to the outhouse. You know why they called it the outhouse? Because it was way out, away from the house. And when I was a kid, they began installing dial telephones in homes. So you didn't have to pick up the phone and say, "Operator, give me so-and-so." You just picked it up and dialed the number. Of course, that meant you had to know what the number was. It was a wonderful technology, but that's something that I look at as the beginnings of the fabric of our society beginning to unweave, because you lost that face-to-face contact. People were no longer going over and standing in the neighbor's backyard and talking for half an hour. They get on the phone. And so you lose all of those nuances of communication, you know, the facial expressions, the body gestures, all that sort of thing. There was a fun thing. When I was a kid, I was in high school, my dad decided he was going to buy a new car. And he went down to test drive this one. He went down to Richmond, Michigan, about 30 miles from where we live. And he's driving down the street in this brand 1949 Ford. It's got an automatic transmission. Something brand new. And the dealer says, "Well, now look," he says, "I want to show you how well this transmission works." He says, "Flip it into reverse." Dad says, "We're going 35 miles an hour." He says, "Go ahead." So he flipped it into reverse, and all of a sudden he's going backwards 35 miles an hour. Dad about dropped the load in his pants on that one. But he was so impressed with the transmission that he bought the car. When I was a kid that same year, I came home from school one day, and there were guys up on the roof of the house putting up a television antenna. Woo! We had TV in the house.
High tech.
Up there was high tech, you betcha. Up until then, every week on Friday night, we'd walk half a mile down the road to the Rails house and spend the evening with them watching TV, because they had a TV. Of course, once we got our own TV, that stopped. We didn't make those visits anymore. When I was a kid, there were two major historical events that were televised. The first one was the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Of course, now you all know of her as just a very old lady. She's still the Queen, though. She was a beautiful lady on her inauguration day. And also, there was the inauguration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the very first presidential inauguration that was televised. And those of us who had TV to watch, we were given the day off to go home and watch it, because it was such a historical event. When I was a kid, the technology to create radar, to develop radar, and synthetic rubber were discovered. Now, of course, you all know why what they use radar for. They use it to guide airplanes around the sky and that sort of thing, right? Well, getting the synthetic rubber relieved us, the USA, from dependence on those Asian nations where we were getting natural rubber. It's just kind of like the situation we're in today with oil. We need something to replace oil. When I was a kid, they learned how to build jet engine aircraft. Now, we lived about 50 miles north of Selfridge Air Force Base up there in Michigan. And I remember the very first time that a jet plane went overhead, and my dad and I were out working in the yard, and we heard this huge noise. And we looked up, what is that? We couldn't see anything. I mean, we heard the noise, but we didn't see any planes. Well, we were just about the right distance from the base. Now, these F-86 fighter pilots, they just love to try and break the sound barrier. So they'd get to going, and just about the time they'd get over our house, boom! We'd hear this huge, loud noise. Of course, it got so bad that the military finally had to ban them from doing that. When I was a kid, there were a lot of technology advances, and those led to more of the technology advances that we enjoy today. But a lot of that came about because of military research and development. So when you log on to your internet, or you grab your cell phone to send a text message to somebody, or you just use your PC, you can think about what the military did to break ground for leading up to those sorts of things. When I was a kid, I still love to read, but I love to read science fiction. Man, if there was a new science fiction book came into the library, I had it. And I'd read it from start to finish, just gobbling it up. You know, the thing that's really interesting to me now is the things that I read about in those science fiction books that were just the fantasy of some author. A lot of those have become real. Cell phones, space travel, just to mention a couple of the things. Of course, what I'm really waiting for them to create now is a real time travel machine, so that I can go walk over and jump in it and be over there in Germany and sit down and have dinner with my son and daughter-in-law and my granddaughter. Or they can come over here for a barbecue on Friday night. So think about this. In the 70 years that I've been alive, there have been so many technology advances. What sort of advances are going to happen in your generation, or in the generation of your kids?